Welcome back to another episode of Life in the Stands podcast. We have Jake and Zach on the podcast today. We're going to catch up about all the NBA stuff that's been going on with the Western Conference and Eastern Conference finals, although one of those series lasted a little bit longer than the other one, much to the dismay of Bender, but we can get into that a little bit. We'll talk about the future of some of the teams that have just been kicked out of the playoffs and kind of what we think will happen there, and then obviously give our finals predictions as well as we get near the end of the episode. So it's going to be pretty NBA heavy episode today, but it should be really good. Lots of good insight into what's going to happen over the next couple of weeks with the finals, the next couple of months with the off season of the NBA. So we'll jump right into it, and we're going to start just by talking about Game 7 with the Heat and the Celtics. I was surprised it wasn't close. I was just surprised it wasn't close. I think that I wouldn't have been surprised if either team won if it was a single digit game. I would have been surprised if either team won by the amount that the Heat won by. Obviously Jason Tatum rolling his ankle could have a lot to do with that, but I'm not fully a believer in Jason Tatum to begin with. You know, he had the amazing Game 7 against the Sixers, sure, but it's the Sixers. I hate saying that as a Sixers fan, but it's the Sixers in a Game 7. Someone's going to put up 50. It just happened to be Jason Tatum instead of Jaylen Brown. So I was surprised that it was as much of a blowout as it was. Feel bad for Jason Tatum with the rolled ankle. It would have been closer, at least, without that happening. But at the end of the day, I think the team that should have won the series won the series.
I do have a question for you though. So I don't think that the Tatum injury played any role in how that game was gonna turn out. I think the Heat win regardless of that injury, but
Mm-hmm.
that's just my opinion. You can obviously debate that if you wanted to,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
do you think that game, the message was more about the Celtics as a whole, or do you think it showed more about Jaylen Brown and his inability to take over by himself?
That's a good question, especially because on this podcast, we tend to like Jaylen Brown more than Jason Tatum. So in a
Hmm.
moment where theoretically Jaylen Brown should have been given the reins with the Jason Tatum injury, why did Jaylen Brown show up the way he did? Because I don't remember his exact stats. I can pull them up here as we're talking real quick,
Yeah,
just so I have
so
them live. But it wasn't
I know
good.
he was 1 for 9 from three and had 8 turnovers. I think that in itself, minus whatever other stats he had going on there, doesn't really matter. I think those were the two big ones. Um,
Yep, yep. So yeah,
I
I'm looking at 8 of 23 overall, 1 of 9 from three, and 8 turnovers. He was minus 17. He had the lowest plus minus of the entire Celtics team, other than Grant Williams, which is another person we could talk about when we talk about the future of the Celtics. Because at one point, I thought Grant Williams was like going to be the sixth man for them for a long time.
Dynamics changed though. They signed Brogdon in the offseason and got a bunch of different guys, and I don't think um, it's any knock on him. I think it's more just how their roster panned out. And I
Yeah.
think even they signed Gallinari, who I know got hurt. So that's a big piece, I think, looking forward to next year already. If you want to
Here's
move pieces, he's a
here's a
guy that started.
question.
That's a guy that started for the Hawks
Right, on
when
that
they.
playoff team that beat the Sixers.
Yes, so I
Yeah.
think that's another guy that's kind of just hanging out and nobody talks about it for next year already. But I'm
Do you
actually going to
think
answer. Oh, you go
I'm
ahead.
sorry, do you think game 7 would have been different this time around if they would have had Gallinari
Uh, no,
against the
I,
Heat?
I think it's closer. I think it's
Hmm.
closer, but I don't think the outcome. The
Okay.
Heat just played. I'm not gonna say they played well. I think they just
Yeah.
played better in the spurts that they had. Obviously,
Yeah.
gamer runs. So I
Hmm.
think they just played better in that sense. The Celtics had a good run with Derek White carrying the offense by himself, and that was in the
Honestly,
third quarter.
I
Um,
completely forgot that Gallinari was a Celtic. I forgot that that dude existed at
got hurt right
all.
at the beginning of the year. It's kind of hard to figure out who's there until you really look at it.
It's true. And I think that would, I mean, it's hard to imagine that not significantly changing the playoff rotation for the Celtics.
Yeah, I think that maybe well, Missoula kind of shortened up his bench anyway, but I think in the let's say 10 minutes that Grant Williams might get, I think Gallinari will score a lot more than well, probably double what Grant Williams can do.
Yeah.
Grant Williams shot pretty well from three, which is what he's there to do, but I think Gallinari brings up Like
Just
not just a
yeah.
three-pointer, not just a three-pointer, but he can kind of create his own and post up
Hmm.
and do different things.
Right.
Um, and they're based off of an isolation kind of like offense where it's like ISO drive and kick majority of the
Yeah.
time. I think that helps. He is slow, so I don't know if that would exactly fit either, but I think
Yeah.
it's something to consider. Um,
It's interesting. It's interesting.
but
It would
I
just I just feel like it would have changed the whole dynamic throughout the whole season too, which is why I say that. But
it
continue.
would change like different offensive schemes maybe if he decided
Yeah.
to like get hot a little bit and turn into the Atlanta Gallinari.
Yeah, it'd
But
be weird. But yeah, continue. You were
oh,
gonna say something like originally
yeah,
about the series.
something
Yeah.
to talk about for next year for sure. But I think
Yeah.
I'm actually going to answer my own question. It's not fair to ask you and not answer my own. I think it says about both. I think the Celtics as a whole need to kind of reconsider either the pieces around Brown and Tatum or go the complete opposite route and maybe trade somebody. I don't know who that would be, but I think the Celtics depended way too much on the three and they shot 9 for 42 from three. Shaq's literally on the desk there saying, I would have punched my teammate if they shot another three in that first quarter, starting 0 for 10 on the game. So I think that's kind of funny. Um, I'm not the only one thinking it. And obviously, a lot of people have that thought after the other day.
Yep.
They underperformed. They underperformed the whole series until it was catch up time. So I think it's kind of on them. But I think Jaylen Brown, for his thoughts going ahead, I don't want to speak for him, but it kind of seems like he wants his own team and wants an offense around him. If you want that, I you can't turn the ball over 8 times. You can't shoot like complete dog crap. Um, you just can't do the things you did in a game 7 and say you're the number one option. If you
I
look
agree.
at
Yeah.
what happened with Harden and Embiid in that game 7, we're having the same conversation. Who's more dependable as a number one option? Jaylen Brown. You just had your first showing of being able to like perform as the number one with Tatum injured, because Tatum was kind of like a standstill guy at that point, and he could barely
Right.
even play defense. They started picking on him.
Yeah, which is crazy too.
Jimmy Butler started getting the switch, and I'm surprised they didn't do it right at the beginning of the game. But they realized he was more hobbled towards the end. Like obviously you can kind of loosen up a little bit as the game goes,
Yeah.
but it's gonna give out on you after a whole game when it was like what the first play of
Right.
the game he did that.
Yeah.
Um,
Which
but
I
I think
mean, props to Jason Tatum for playing the rest of the game to begin with. But
yeah, but I also don't think that's an excuse.
yeah.
You kind of use an excuse for Miami too, like they're without a 20 point a game scorer and Tyler Hero. Um,
Hmm.
Gabe
Yeah.
Vincent rolled his ankle in the middle of the series. Jimmy Butler rolled his ankle in the Knicks series, and they still won. Like you
Yeah.
can't blame everything on that, especially when he
Yeah.
stayed in the game.
Yeah.
Um,
Because ankle injuries, man, like you can play through those. Like, yeah, it's painful, but like if it's a sprained ankle, like you can play through a lot of that from personal experience and like you said, all the guys that literally have had the same or similar kinds of injuries the entire way through. LeBron played on a torn tendon in his foot the entire way
yeah,
through, right?
I saw a post
So
that said something about if LeBron can do this, then we don't want to hear about Tatum's ankle.
yeah, yeah. So I do agree with that. I think the Jaylen Brown conversation is interesting as far as him being a number one on a team because he's still really young. He's what, 25, 24?
25, I think. Or
So he's
he's a little older than Tatum, so he might be 25 or 26, and Tatum's
25,
24,
26.
25.
Yeah, but either way, I mean, he's still super young. I think that he still has a lot of potential to be the guy. Obviously, a game 7 showing like that does not do you a lot of favors. But another thing to think about is Jason Tatum rolled that ankle going into that game. The last game 7 they played, Jaylen Brown had to take a back seat because Tatum put up 50 on how many other shots he took.
Yeah.
So going into that game, if I'm Jaylen Brown, am I thinking to myself, I got to put 50, or am I thinking to myself, I got to play defense and I got to be the number 2 guy to what JT's going to do and hopefully put 40 or 50 again. And like, I know if he wants to be the guy, he should go into that game with the mindset of, I'm going to get my 40 or 50. Like, I'm going to do what I need to do. Like, you would want that guy to go into that game with that mindset and then execute on that, regardless of what happened. But I'm just saying, if I'm going into that game and I'm Jaylen Brown, I'm not a pro athlete, but I could at least understand the mindset of him going to that game, not expecting to be the number one scorer, and then watching that happen, and then being like, "Oh crap!" Now whatever game plan we had, it's out the window. I mean, if you shoot 9 threes and you make one of them, I mean, you should play better than that. But it was probably very unexpected for him too. And you don't know what it could have done to his rhythm to see that as well. Because, I mean, as much as we talk about Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum, which one's better? Which one would you prefer? If you had to pick a team, who would you start with? All those kinds of things. I'd probably still pick Jaylen Brown, but there's no denying how much he plays off of Jason Tatum too, and how much they play off of each other. So you talk
Yeah,
about
because you
Jason
can only
Tatum
game
being
plan for one or the other. So
right. So you make Jason Tatum a standstill guy. Well, now all the attention that he was going to get is on Jaylen Brown, and all the opportunities that Jaylen Brown was going to get that were playing off of Tatum now will no longer exist.
yeah, but
So
okay, now pause there. You're saying about Tatum turning into a standstill guy, and Jaylen Brown getting all the attention. So if Jaylen Brown gets his own team, he's gonna get all the attention. Shooting 8 for 23 and 8 turnovers is not good when you're getting the
yeah,
attention, and that's something I guess he hasn't had a chance to learn from. But I think
right.
he's still young, so he can learn from that. But I think it just doesn't look good as a first impression.
Yeah.
That's just
And I
where I'm
agree
at.
with that. I agree with that. First impression doesn't look good. The side that I'm trying to take is, yeah, he's still young. He has room to learn from it. And going into that game 7, that wasn't the expectation from him. So, like, a lot of things changed. And you played Miami in a game 7, who played zone the majority of the time. Like, he didn't go into that game thinking he was going to take the double teams. He didn't go into that game thinking that he wasn't going to get
Yeah,
any looks off of Jason Tatum drives or kicks or extra passes. So there's things that happen in that game where I'm willing to give him a pass, like a semi pass, for this first kind of choke job. Like, okay, like, you didn't perform great. You should have looked a lot better. I think you have it in you to like build a team around you. If this situation comes up again and you look the same, I probably don't feel that way anymore. But I'm gonna bank on the fact that when the situation comes up again like this, he'll perform. That's what I guess. But
there is a funny thought for you. I was listening to Draymond on his podcast talking about
mhm.
how when they played them, and
Yeah,
obviously nothing much has really changed, but he made a comment about at some point in that series they figured out they could shade them all to the left side, make them all go left, and they started doing silly stuff like dribbling off your foot and just turning the ball over in some weird fashion. And then
yep.
they showed clips of that actually happening in that game 7 where Jaylen Brown got pickpocketed from behind by Jimmy Butler and then got the transition dunk. He dribbled it off his foot, like a bunch of random stuff.
All
So I
going
think
left.
Jaylen Brown needs to work on his game going to the left. That's all I'm going to say about that. He needs to learn how to take the attention. He needs to learn how to go left. Period. Done. Figure it out. If you're trying to be the guy or even the number 2 option, you can't just be really really bad.
Yeah.
Like
Especially at this level of the game. Like, I feel like you hear middle school and high school coaches saying, "Hey, force him left. Hey, force him right. Like, hey, stay on that hand." If we're in the NBA and we're saying to ourselves, "Just force him left," yeah, that's a problem. That's a really big problem.
you're a pro athlete, you can't go left. It's crazy.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's right up there with the people that can't shoot free throws. Ben
But
Simmons,
before we
Ben Simmons.
oh yeah, that too. I was gonna say
Kyle's
before
not
we
here,
move
so I'm
on,
good.
yeah, yeah, there you go. I was gonna say before we move on, I do want to mention about the Heat though. Cody Martin
Mhm.
getting 26 is kind of a big deal, big game, big performance. But I do have a question off of that. Do you think Jimmy Butler should have won the conference finals MVP?
That's a good question too. I think I think yes. I think he should have won the conference finals MVP, even though he was not always the best player on the floor. He is very obviously the most important player on the floor for the Heat.
Okay,
So, I mean, obviously there are things you could point to that are like he's not scoring the most points. Bam led him in rebounding. I'm not sure who had the most assists. He might be leading them in assists still, but that also could be taken
probably.
over by Caleb, not Caleb Martin, but Gabe Vincent, depending on how much he's had the ball in his hands and stuff. But I think at the end of the day, everyone on that Miami Heat team is successful because they look at Jimmy.
Yeah, that's
Even
fair.
Caleb,
And I
even Caleb Martin was asked. Like, I just saw a press conference today. Sorry, and then I'll let you give your thoughts on it too, because it is a good question about yeah, like who really deserves that? Because it's kind of something similar to like Kawhi winning his Finals MVP, Iggy winning his Finals MVP, when like those kind of situations where it's like, okay, like
yeah,
he's the best player in the team the whole year, but who was the best player in the series? Caleb Martin was asked today in an interview how Jimmy Butler's career has affected the other players on the Miami Heat roster. And he talked about how his path and the makeup of their roster, who they are, being undrafted free agents and just like a bunch of scrappy kind of guys. Like they all look at Jimmy's career and they say to themselves, like, that's what we want. Like we're long term, we're gonna grind, we're gonna work in our games, we're gonna do the right things, we're gonna like he's instilled that level of belief in them. So I think when you talk about the MVP, you do need to look beyond, who scored the most points, who had the most rebounds, who had the most assists. Jimmy's the most important player on that team. If Jimmy wasn't there, they might not be a playoff team just purely because of the mindset and the bravado that they come into a game with.
Yeah, and
I don't think
I
that
agree
exists
with
without
that.
Jimmy. So that's what I would
I,
say. I think he still deserves it, but
I think he's a
interested to hear
big
your
part of
thoughts.
I think he's a big part of what their culture is, and even taking over for what D Wade kind of stood for. I
Hmm.
think that like passing of the torch was actually like legit this time around.
Yep.
Um, but I'm gonna agree with you. I just kind of wanted your thoughts on that because some people are saying that Martin should have got it just because
Yeah.
he was so consistent through the whole series. But I think
I
just
get it,
because
but
just because Martin overperformed and some could say Jimmy underperformed doesn't make Jimmy less valuable. So I think
yeah.
that's kind of where that goes with that whole thing.
Yeah,
But
I agree.
we kind of touched on this, but we're going to move on to the next topic. And what do you think the Celtics' future looks like? And obviously, we're
Hmm.
probably talking about Jaylen Brown here a little bit.
Yeah.
But what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. I think that if I was the GM, I would probably run it back with some different pieces around the two of them. I understand why like Robert Williams is around and everything still, but I actually don't think he's that great of a fit for their team. I think that the Celtics would be much better off with guys like Al Horford. Um, a name that rings a bell to me that I think would be a great fit on their roster. That's kind of an old guy, not in the league anymore, but Ersan Ilyasova.
Just a
I think would
stretch
be,
big.
I think would be a great fit on the Celtics. I think they're much better off surrounding them with shooters because they're both top tier defenders. You don't need a Robert Williams. You need an Al Horford.
Yeah, and
So
they play
so
much
I
better.
yeah.
And Robert Williams is that like dump off guy, but I think Al Horford stretching the floor helps them isolate a lot better
Right,
and
because
do
if
the
that's gonna
driving kick
exactly,
thing.
you're gonna lean into that offensive style, then you got to lean into that offensive style. And I think one of the things that they actually struggle with is going back and forth because you go from one offensive set where it is very static, four out, one in, very basic kind of offensive set, but then you go to that five out where it's drive and kick, lots of motion, lots of cutting, lots of doing that kind of thing. And it's different. It's different to play those two styles. And when you look at a guy like Jaylen Brown who had 8 turnovers in a game, like that could contribute to it too, on top of his struggles going left and all those kind of things. But if I was the GM, that's what I would do. I would probably keep the similar core there, keep Derek White, keep your high performers. You're bringing back Gallinari. I think that would have been a big difference. Keep that core, run it back one more time. Try to go after that with little different pieces. Also because they're both so young. Like they're both younger than Joel Embiid still. So I think like there's just time there. What
Yes.
I think they're going to do though, so that's what I would do if I was the GM. That's not what I think they'll do though, which I
Okay.
know is like kind of what you're trying to get to.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. So what I think they'll do, I think that they'll move on from Jaylen Brown this summer. I think watching his performance in the game seven with Jason Tatum's injury, they're probably saying to themselves exactly what you were saying to yourself. Is he the guy that could big? Is he a number two? Is he a number one? Is he someone that we can trust in those moments? And what could we get for him? They've obviously not been shy about marketing him around to see what they could do. I think that they probably end up moving Jaylen Brown this summer because of that. And what they probably get back is something that's not as good as Jaylen Brown, is my guess.
Yeah. So right off of that point, exactly. I don't think they'll move on. And I wouldn't
Mm,
move on personally either. I think he will sign that 5 year 295 or whatever that looks like anymore.
mm,
With the caps going up and everything. But I think staying with the same core and running it back is the most viable option because you're not going to get the same quality player in return.
mm.
People want to throw out Dame's name, but I just don't think that's legit. I think you give up too much in that case. Or I think another option was like pairing Jaylen Brown with Dame in Portland. So you would get Anthony Simons and like the number 3 pick in that case, which again, that kind of you're moving backwards. So I don't think that's
Yeah.
really a good option there. And I don't think they'll look at it the way like you said with trading him just because you're not going to get anything good. Um, but I think maybe the role players need to change. I think Al Horford may need to go. Like I would go the whole other route. I think they've been running the same offense for so long
Hmm.
that I think it's going to be easier to catch on to, and their style of play, I think, kind of killed them in that game 7 with the 3 pointers. So I
Yeah.
think Robert Williams being so young, you need to keep him with that core guys, like core group of guys with Jaylen Brown, Tatum. I'm still going to throw Marcus Smart in there just because I think the
Yeah.
defense, like the 3 and D,
Yeah.
but I think they need to change up their offense. I think Missoula never had enough time. Like, I know he was kind of there the whole season, but I don't think he's had enough time to actually implement what he wants. Going
Right.
from Brad Stevens to Udoka to him, there was just like the same kind of transition.
Yeah, it's all been the
Stevens is
same.
still, yeah, Stevens is still in upper management. So I'm pretty sure he probably put it like a little bug in Udoka's ear, and then he got in trouble. So then you bring in Missoula,
And it's the same
and
thing.
same thing. So you need some
Yeah.
kind of change. And now does that look like a new coach? That's debatable. I don't think so, just because he came back from 3-0. If they get swept, I guarantee you he would have been fired. Just because that does not look good as what, number 2 seed going in
Yeah.
there, getting swept by an 8. But
Yeah. I mean, should we be looking at it any differently? And that's, I guess that's kind of like, that could be a hot topic issue too. But I mean, you went down 3-0, and yes, you forced a game 7, but it didn't look like at any point in that game 7 you had a chance of winning.
no.
And
But
in the 3 games that you did win, Gabe Vincent was out.
yeah,
And
but
it's, I don't know. I mean, like,
I think you give him the first half of next year just to see what things look like.
yeah,
Especially if you keep the same core. If you don't keep
yeah,
the same core, that means the offense has to look different, in my
right.
opinion. So
Yeah.
we'll see
I
where it
mean,
goes.
yeah. And Missoula's young too. I mean, he's super young too. So that, I mean, it makes sense to keep just young, fresh ideas in Boston.
Yeah,
But at some point, you got to grow up, because we've been saying young, fresh ideas in Boston since Brad Stevens was there as the coach.
yeah, yeah,
And now we're 5 years in, 6 years into all of that
yeah, something like that.
happening. So
At least
at some point,
five conference finals to figure it out, I guess.
right. So at some point, you got to make that next step. At some point, we also got to be talking about Jason Tatum. I know he rolled his ankle. He was 5 of 13 in that game.
I mean, I've been talking about Jason Tatum. I mean, we both have about Jaylen Brown being better. Just
Yeah,
because of the efficiency thing, Jaylen Brown wasn't efficient in that game 7, which is what we were harping on this whole episode so far. But throughout the whole season, throughout the whole playoffs, he's been that guy.
yeah,
Um, Jason Tatum kind of picks and chooses. Like he'll have a hot half and a cold half, and you can't
right,
do that as a number one that way either. Um,
right.
but I think an option that's out there, if they wanted to fire Missoula, I think Monty Williams is probably the next option. He's the only other coach that's really hanging out other than Doc Rivers, and I don't think Boston bringing back Doc is realistic.
Yeah,
I think Monty Williams has a way of getting star players to play well together,
hmm,
and kind of cooperate. So I think that'd be the best option. He's also a good player development coach. So I
yeah.
think the young core that made the 5 conference finals will have an
Great fit for Monty Williams.
opportunity to put things together. But I don't think that's going to happen. I just think that should happen.
Yeah, I do agree. I think that would be like a beautiful fit with Monty Williams. And now that you brought up coaches, before we transition into our last topic about the finals and getting into that, we'd be remiss without mentioning Nick Nurse being hired as the Sixers coach and talking about it at least for 2 or 3 minutes and giving some initial takes. So Bender, I'm really interested to hear. We haven't talked at all. We normally when news like that comes out, we normally send a few texts and then we say, wait, we got to talk about this on the podcast. Let's not go too deep. But we haven't talked about this at all. So I have no idea what you're thinking when it comes to Nick Nurse.
I like it. I think he's not a coach that'll put up with any crap. I was actually watching another podcast. I get a lot of info off of it. I'm just kind of into what certain people's opinions are. With his mindset, James Harden, you're playing 82 games. Joel Embiid, you're not doing no, sorry, bleep this out, pussy shit. You're gonna go into the paint. You're gonna bully your way in. You're going to do this. You're not going to hang out at the 3-point line. I think he's the guy to kind of make them grow up and stop being in their ways. So I think that'll help. And I like that he's a defensive minded coach. Toronto has always been very aggressive, like on ball pressure, forcing turnover kind of team. And we're very lazy on defense last how many years, even starting back with Brett Brown. And Ben Simmons was a good defender and whatnot, but he only played defense when he wanted to.
Hmm.
So I mean, I think having that
Yep.
kind of the mindset with a coach is going to help us.
Yeah. And transition defense has always been bad since Embiid's
Yes.
been there.
Yeah.
Um, so I think, yeah, I really agree. I think the Nick Nurse signing is great. I will say that when Doc Rivers got signed, I think everyone looked around and said, "This is great. Hall of Fame coach coming in. He's going to get Joel Embiid to get his shit together." So a lot of the same things that are being said about Nick Nurse
It happened
were
offensively
said.
with Embiid.
It happened offensively with Embiid. Not, but even I mean, defensively it happened a little bit too. But I think that this is just the next step in that progression. I think if I look at the coaching styles of Brett Brown to Doc Rivers to Nick Nurse, I think you literally see like a step ladder where Brett Brown is like, okay, yeah, I probably should have been the first coach, getting them off the ground, wasn't too stressed, much more player development, much more concerned with just training guys, coaching guys, getting them to the next level of their game. And then you come in with Doc Rivers, and now there's an expectation of really winning, right? There's that next level of like grit, next level of toughness that gets instilled in the team. We see a couple more comebacks over the last couple of years. We see, better record overall. We see things that look like championship contender teams do, like being top 10 in offensive rating, defensive rating, and some of those things, right? Some of those things start to come with Doc Rivers. I see Nick Nurse as just the next step in that evolution where it's just leaning more into the tough mindedness, the transition defense, the Embiid putting up 30 points a game and 28 of them are going to be in the paint. Like those I
Yeah.
just see that as the next step in the evolution there. And I really like where it's going. So I'm a
I'm gonna
fan of the Nick Nurse
I'm
signing
gonna
too.
put it in a real simple way too. The effort level with Brett Brown, maybe like 50%. Doc Rivers, like 75, 80. I think Nick Nurse cranks that to like 90, 100.
Yep.
I think that's kind of how I look at that as because I think Doc
Yep.
made individuals better, but I think as a team didn't make the team better. I think PJ was a part of making the team better more than what Doc was, which is a whole different conversation about veteran leadership and whatever else you
Yep.
want to talk about with that.
Yep.
But I like the fit, and I guess we'll see.
Yeah.
But real quick question, real quick answer because we're gonna move on to the finals because that's
Yeah.
the bigger topic, bigger question that is
Yep.
coming up. So, do you think that if every team in the East ran it back right now, do you think the Sixers make conference finals or make the finals with how like this? It might be likely, by the way. Celtics keep the same core. Bucks keep the same core. We keep the same core, same team. Like no moves other than like the bench spots and rotation players. The Knicks are probably going to stay pat for the most part unless they trade RJ or Julius. Cavs are staying pat. Like who do you think the Sixers get anywhere further?
Um, no, I don't think
Oh,
they do. I don't think they do because when I look at, like if it comes around next year, everyone on the Sixers is another year older, and everyone on the Celtics is another year into their prime. Everyone on the Knicks is another year into their prime. Um,
that's a
so I
fair point.
think, yeah, so I think like adding another year wouldn't necessarily do that. I think if you play back right now, everyone at the same age and just redo the playoffs, you could probably redo this playoffs in the Eastern Conference 10 times and get a different result every time. Um, Or I guess I should say 8 times because the Miami Heat at 8. Who was the 7th seed? It was the what was the Hawks. Hawks probably didn't have a realistic chance. Six wasn't Raptors. It was
Nets because
Nets
we played the Nets.
because we played the Nets. Probably not a realistic chance after trading away Kyrie. So maybe 5 or 6 teams in the East this year had a realistic shot of going to the finals and representing the East. I think if you play play the Eastern Conference playoffs 10 times, you probably get 5 different winners.
Probably.
Um, So, I think like if you were to ask that same question, but just move it to like redo this year's playoff, yeah, anything could have happened. I really still believe that. It's evident by the 8 seed being in the finals. Um, but
That's fair.
uh, but yeah, next year I don't think so. So, but yeah, all right, let's move on to our last topic of discussion for today. Bender, unfortunately, the Nuggets kicked out your Lakers. but the Lakers did make a good run and did make it farther than the Suns.
Yeah, they
But
did.
that being said, the Nuggets looked really good in that Western Conference Finals. Who do you have in the finals themselves? Are you taking the rolling Nuggets or are you taking the battle tested Heat?
Yeah, I'm taking the underdog. I'm taking the Heat. I have the Heat in seven. I think I saw something where the Nuggets have the largest win differential or win percentage differential between games at home and on the road. So basically, they win at home and they lose on the road more oftentimes than not.
Yep.
And obviously, they beat the Lakers. They swept the Lakers. That is what it is anymore. But I think the Heat are a team that is pretty good at stealing one and have shown that plenty of times so far in this playoff season. So I think they'll steal one, defend home court. Um, I believe I don't know what the record was between the two in the regular season, but I know they're very like chippy with each other. So I think that'll be a fun aspect to the series and the competitiveness.
Yeah.
Um, Again, a lot comes down to role players. Aaron Gordon's going to defend Jimmy Butler. So I think how does Jimmy work around that and get switches? Because he was real good at getting switches, whether it was the Grant Williams drama or Derek White, whoever he decided to attack. I think he needs to work on trying to get those switches, and that comes with play calling as well. Stagger screens, whatever they run him off of.
Yep.
I think Bam is the best defender, best option to go against, or best matchup to go against Joker. Joker's still going to
Mhm.
put up his 20 to 30 points, but I think that is a matchup that you like and you don't have to double team him. I think
Exactly.
the way you scheme that is play one on one with Joker, watch for cuts because Aaron Gordon's going to cut behind your head. Um, or Bruce Brown, whoever
Yep.
energetic dude comes off the bench or whatever it
Yeah.
is.
Michael Porter Jr.
Yeah, and I that's the other part. I don't trust MPJ to save my life.
Yeah.
So I think in some ways that's going to hurt them. I think there's a mismatch there between like MPJ trying to score against Struce or Martin. Got to switch on Vincent, Lowry, whoever it is. Like they're kind of like the Heat are kind of small. And I'm kind of worried about that for the Heat, but
Yeah.
I don't think
Mhm.
MPJ is that guy. Um,
Yeah.
and Jamal Murray's consistency is the big reason why the Nuggets even made it as far as they did. And I'm a big Jamal Murray fan, but I'm kind of waiting and seeing on how consistent that's going to be because
Mhm.
the teams that they've played aren't really known for defense at the guard
Right.
position.
Right.
Um, the T-Wolves breeze right by them, right? That's not even a thought. You could win without Jamal Murray against the T-Wolves, point
Yep.
blank. The
Yep.
Suns, CP3, little guy, kind of a good
Old.
defender, but he's old. Yeah, Campaign was the replacement. He's not really a defender.
No.
You got Torrey Craig and a Kogi there, but Monty Williams couldn't figure out how to even put him in like the lineup at
Yeah.
all.
Right.
Um, and then you go and play the Lakers. D'Lo's not a defender. He fried D'Lo, and they were
Yeah.
actually making fun of him for it at some point in that series. So I think he hasn't been tested at all in these playoffs either. But I think it's also a good thing that people are starting to recognize how good of a player he is. I think he can get 20. I just don't
Mhm.
think you'll see a consistent 30 like you did in the Lakers series, which I think gives the Heat a chance because they play
Yeah.
so much different.
Yeah. Yeah. It's all good thoughts. So Heat and 7 and some good points there. I do agree that I think Bam is the best matchup for Jokic because you don't have to double. So what makes Jokic the most dangerous? You just take that away. You let him score his 30. Hell, you let him put up 40 if he wants, but he's not going to have more than 5 assists. And that's how I'd play that for sure. The matchups are interesting all over the place because I think the Heat at almost every position are smaller
Mhm.
than what the Nuggets are. And it'll be interesting to see how much that comes into play. The stylistic differences are also very interesting. You get a lot of like heavy zone from the Heat and that kind of stuff. It'll be interesting to see how the Nuggets respond to those things.
Nuggets are a better
Um,
shooting team than what the Celtics. Well, I can't even say that. The Celtics struggle from three, but we're one of the best 3-point shooting teams. So I can't really even say that,
yeah. And
but
it's
we'll see.
actually something I was going to bring up to begin with too, because we talk about 3-point shooting as if teams should not live and die by the three. But we watched the Golden State Warriors live and die by the three and win championships doing it. So I think the question needs to start becoming, are you a team that's going to live and die by the three? Not the question needs to move away from, are you a team that's going to live and die by the three? and move towards, are we going to trust these guys, these individual players, to be able to hit the shots when it comes time? Because at this point, every team is relying on the three to a certain extent. So it's
Right.
really, to me, like, like we got to stop thinking like, oh, like they shoot a lot of threes. It's not, it's not going to go on the playoffs. Now, do we think their guys are going to be able to create good enough looks at three to still be able to make enough of them in the playoffs? That's really the question we need to start asking. But back
Yeah.
to finals. If you want to mention anything on there, then I'll move back to finals. But
Well, yeah, I was gonna say, like related to the finals and matchups, I think, and I don't know how teams have exactly tried to play this, but I think those one-on-one matchups that I've mentioned make sense. And then on top of that, I think
mhm,
you maybe deny KCP the ball. You chase Jamal Murray off the 3-point line, and you have to turn Aaron Gordon and MPJ into ISO guys or 3-point scorers. I think that's
yeah,
your best chance of winning as the Heat. And I
yeah,
think you might actually see Jimmy on MPJ just to kind of disrupt him because MPJ is still young. I think Butler can be that guy to get in his head. Even
yeah,
MPJ is not a good defender. If you even get that switch with MPJ even being taller than him, I
yeah.
think you
Give
expose
it to
him more.
Jimmy. Yeah, I give that to Jimmy too. I think so. I also think that the Heat will have to play fast. I think
Yes.
if there's a 200 possessions in this game, that's going to benefit the Heat. If there's 100, it'll benefit the Nuggets.
Yeah.
So I think that's also a really big thing to consider. So we're about out of time for now, but I mean, just closing thoughts on the series because I didn't actually give like a game prediction yet. I think Nuggets Heat will go to Nuggets are going to have home court advantage. I think Heat do steal a game in the beginning of the series, but I think it probably ends up 2-2. So I think it does go seven, but I'll give the edge to the Nuggets at home in the game seven. I really want I really want Jimmy to win a championship.
I do
But
too. I just
this
don't know
but
if it's the
this
team to beat. But
yeah, like this Nuggets team just looks really, really tough. So I'll leave it at that. I think I got the Nuggets in seven.
gotcha. It's kind of a toss-up, whichever way you want to throw it. It's a tough decision to make. I chose Heat in seven. You got Nuggets in seven.
We'll
This
see
is
what
gonna wrap up
happens.
our yeah. This is gonna wrap up our episode. We're gonna keep talking about the finals, more MLB action, and post NFL draft. So stay tuned for the off season and other thoughts.